Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Here with, get ready, the Haydn Symphony Crusade, Symphony No. 44, the Trauer Symphony, Mourning. And we don't mean mourning as in like Peer Gynt, no. This is mourning as in grieving, lamenting, funerals. Yeah. But, there's nothing funereal about this music at all. I mean, it's minor key, it's scary, it's gripping, it's emotional, it's turbulent, but there isn't anything that suggests bereavement. The reason it got that title is because Haydn allegedly said he wanted the slow movement, which is a beautiful, ethereal major key piece, quite lovely and consoling, played at his funeral. Now, there's no evidence, of course, that he actually said that, that we know of, and it wasn't played at his funeral. So the whole thing is irrelevant, but you might as well give the thing a title because that's how people remember it, right? And I'm very excited talking about this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm wearing my Join the Haydn Symphony Crusade t-shirt, but I'm actually doing a Haydn Symphony Crusade talk, which for reasons I've never quite figured out doesn't usually happen. I cycle these things in and out, and you can get your Join the Haydn Symphony Crusade t-shirt at the ClassicsToday.com shop, which you can find at ClassicsToday.com. And I may throw a link at the bottom of this review too. We'll see. Anyway, here's the point. Number 44 is one of the biggies in the Sturm and Drang series of symphonies, Storm and Stress, that wonderful period featuring many works in minor keys and which erupt in huge gouts of passion and tension and emotional expressivity. Really extraordinary music. But the thing I want to stress is not the passion and emotional expressivity, which is obvious. It's going to hit you. It's going to get you no matter what you do. No, not that. It's the way that Haydn heightens the tension and the emotional expressivity through his handling of form, through the overall conception. The most important thing, and I can't stress this enough, and I have in many of these talks, was, Haydn's statement to his biographer. I forget which biographer it was, but I quoted it somewhere. But the point is, he said, Haydn always conceived his works whole. This is a four-movement work that could not exist in any other form than that in which Haydn presents it to us. And it is that form and the relationship between the various parts that creates the exceptional emotional tension that makes this music so exciting. And we've got lots of musical examples. Oh my goodness, lots and lots of them. We're going to run the whole symphony, and it's going to take some time. And I'm warning you up front. Sit back, relax, and let's just dig into this amazing, amazing piece of music. I think this one is in like E minor. I have to find it now because I stuck it somewhere, but it's in E minor. Well, there's 45. So up there's 44. Yes, it's in E minor. And the whole symphony is homotonal. That means it's in one key. It's in E. It's in E minor or E major. That's each movement begins that way. It doesn't stay that way. It goes all over the place, as it develops and evolves. But each key stays in more or less the same key, which gives it already a welcome degree of unity. But there are remarkable things in every single movement, really remarkable things. So let's start with the first movement. Now, the thing I want you to keep in mind, pardon me, I got a mosquito bite there. The thing I want you to keep in mind about the first movement is that it is, two things. First of all, it is monothematic. What does that mean? Monothematic means that it is based on a single tune or motive which generates other ones. I've often said, monothematic, it means single theme. Every movement's based on one theme. No, that's not true at all. It means they all relate to each other, and there is a certain ongoing organic development of material arising from the initial motive. But it does not mean that the material that Haydn uses is limited in any way. We shouldn't ever think of that as some form of inhibition. It isn't. It's just the opposite. So we have initial idea. And I'm going to play you the initial idea. It's important that you know the initial idea, because then all the rest of it really just explains itself to you as you listen. Here it is. All right, very simple. The thing to keep in mind is that opening motive, the loud thing. Bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum. That thing. Because that will be the beginning of the second subject, only in a major key. And if you know that, you know the whole movement. But there are some fascinating things about this movement. The most wonderful one, in my view, is the way Haydn has thought through the necessity of taking a repeat of the opening section, the exposition, the part where he presents the thematic material of the whole movement. Normally, these are very perfunctory. You have a first idea and then some, motion music, transitional material to the second idea, which in this case is in a nice warm major key with the same music, but it's in a major key. And then it sort of heads back to the minor and stops. And it goes back to the beginning again. Well, Haydn does not do that. And I have prepared a wonderful little example of what Haydn does not do. And then I want to tell you what Haydn does do. And then we'll run the whole movement so you can see what I mean. And this is, there are many subtleties we can talk about, but I like to focus on just a few things so that when you listen, you hear them right away. And the rest of it, you can explore at your leisure. So if Haydn was your sort of average, not terribly interesting composer, here is what he would do at the end of the exposition, going back to the beginning again. Now, you remember what the beginning sounded like. Here it is. I'm going to play it for you again. All right, that's the opening of the symphony. Now I'm going to play you what Haydn does not do. Here it is. That sounds perfectly fine, doesn't it? It comes up to a big climax. It comes to a complete normal pause and goes back to the beginning. Right. But that's not what Haydn does. Haydn does not want you to know what is going to happen next. Here is what Haydn does. Hear the difference? You see, you don't know whether you're going to go back to the beginning or whether you're going forward to something else. And that creates suspense. And the suspense creates tension. And tension creates expressive music. It's exactly what happens in a Hitchcock film. You know what Hitchcock said about the difference between horror and suspense. Horror is when some guy shocks you suddenly and comes jumping out from behind the corner of the building and then slashes and there's buckets of blood everywhere. And, that's horror. It's exciting. It is. But it's it's the surprise is over the minute it happens, and then it goes on. Suspense is different. Suspense is when you know the guy is around the corner with the knife waiting to jump out and kill the guy, but you don't know when the guy, the victim, who doesn't know that there's a slasher around the corner, is going to jump out and get them, but you do. So you're in a state of constant tension, waiting for what you're expecting to happen to happen. And this is what Haydn does. He keeps us in suspense by adding just that tiny little bit of music at the end of the exposition, which could go any way. And you don't know which way it's going to go, but you know it's got to go somewhere. It's either going back or it's going forward, and so the opening of the development section also is unexpected because we've been kept in suspense. Yes, that is suspense. So let's run the entire first movement now without the repeat, because it would just take too long. But I want you to be aware of it. So if you get a recording of your own and you listen to it, it will have the repeat, no doubt. And you can pay attention to that particularly marvelous moment. It's a great thing because it shows us just how carefully and how thoughtfully Haydn designs these movements. There's nothing perfunctory about any of this music, and especially not in the Sturm und Drang period. So here's the entire movement. That was Barry Wordsworth with the Capella Istropolitana on Naxos. This is actually a very good performance. Now, the second movement is minuet. And the minuet is usually placed third in classical symphonies, as you may know, the scherzo or the minuet. There are very few Haydn symphonies where it comes second. And when it does, it's always for a special reason. And this particular minuet is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Haydn calls it canon in diapason, which means diapason, in case you were wondering, it's diapason. Diapason, it means a lot of different things in music. Most of the time it means the fundamental rank of pipes on an organ, the basic organ stop that runs the range of the whole instrument. But it basically means all the way through, and derives from the Greek, and we don't have to go into how it derives from the Greek. In this case, the minuet is a canon, that is, like row your boat, where one part follows the other a fixed distance apart. It's a canon all the way through, from beginning all the way to the end. That's the diapason part. It is a thoroughgoing canon. But rather than being strict and formulaic, this canon is terrifying. It is even darker and creepier than anything in the first movement. The mood is only getting bleaker and more intense. That's what makes it so fascinating. Haydn actually did another one of these canonic minuets in his Opus 76 quartet in D minor, where it was called the Witches' Minuet, the Hexen Minuet. But, Haydn was a master contrapuntist. This is contrapuntal music. Counterpoint is a feature of this symphony. You may have noticed in the first movement that opening motive, bum, 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 was often in the bass line under all kinds of other things. So this is a contrapuntal minuet in the same key in E minor as the first movement, which only makes that atmosphere, that expressive quality of E minor more intense. And it's very strict. That strictness, that rigidity of the parts following each other all the way through is one of the things that makes it so scary. I mean, it's the repressed emotion. And at one point, even though it stays canonic, that emotion breaks out. And it is one of the most anguished and beautifully tragic moments, I think, in the entire classical period. I want to play you that moment. It's unbelievably passionate and totally unexpected. Here it is. And it's still strictly in canon. You can hear one part following the other all the way through. It's just remarkable. Really, really incredible. I find that moment right there, when in that minuet, when it suddenly just sort of erupts, exceptional, really exceptional. I mean, there are not many tragic minuets. Let's face it, it's a minuet. It's a courtly dance. You can't dance to this. No way you're going to dance to this. It isn't going to happen. But Haydn created the tragic minuet, which became the tragic or spooky scherzo. For example, the scherzo in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is also just as slithery and creepy, spooky as this. And this was the model for that kind of a movement, for a dance movement or a quick movement that is actually, well, here it is. Let me just play it for you. That's the minuet all the way through without repeats. Now, in normal minuets, you hear the first half of it with repeats, which is what you hear here. And then there's a middle section, a trio section, a very beautiful trio section with some tricky horn parts. And then minuet comes back, which is what I just played you. So you can hear the thing all the way through. It's an amazing piece. So where does that leave us? Well, Haydn has given us a very tense and exciting first movement, which ended in E minor, in the minor key. There was no happy resolution. And then this minuet, which is, if anything, even darker than the first movement. So the third movement, the one that Haydn theoretically wanted played at his funeral, is an adagio, which means very slow, for muted strings with woodwinds, and it's in E major. It's the consoling relief, the release that we've been craving after hearing these first two terrifying movements. It's the heart of the symphony. And it's so necessary at that point. And that's what I mean by paying attention to how Haydn intensifies the emotional depth of this music through form. Because by the time that minuet ends, we are crying out for something, some contrast, some ray of hope, of happiness. And Haydn presents it. And this is just the most beautiful movement. I'm only going to play you the first minute or so of it, but I want you to hear the amazing romantic gushing bit where the music just blossoms into a consoling, warm bear hug of luscious melody. I mean, the romantic movement you feel is just around the corner, although it was actually 50 years away when Haydn wrote this. But it's when the woodwinds enter, and you see how carefully Haydn has written it. If you look at the score, it's from piano crescendo to forte, then piano crescendo to forte, with octave displacement. And the violins, they play the melody once, and then they take it up an octave for an extra passionate just sigh. And it's ya da 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 da. It's so beautiful. It's just what the doctor ordered after those first two movements. So let's listen to the opening of the Adagio, and you can hear just how beautifully Haydn sets up the contrast with everything that's come before. It's timeless, that music. Haydn was the master of the adagio, the slow movement that has an almost spiritual or transcendental quality, a sense of timelessness. It could have been written any time in the history of music, practically. It sounds initially like, yes, it's a piece from a classical symphony, very cultured, very, very elegant, very finely turned, but then he throws away that, what you might call that classical propriety, and lets the emotion just pour out in two incredibly warm and sensuous phrases. And it's just exceptional. It's amazing. So, having given us now that ray of hope, that consolation, the balm that we've been seeking, he slams the door shut in the finale. The finale is a furious whirlwind of vicious music that's clearly based on the opening idea of the first movement, right? Bum, 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 bum. Well, this is dum, bum, 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 bum. It's a faster version of a similar kind of idea, a unison, jagged motive for the full orchestra in E minor. Now, this opening also is fascinating. The repeat is a regular repeat. In other words, it comes to an end and then you just go back in the way Haydn didn't do in the first movement. But the theme itself has something really interesting about it, and it's very hard to describe. Again, it's monothematic. The whole movement is based on that 7-note thing. But what makes it so cool is that the stress changes depending on how you hear it. You'd never hear it quite the way you did at the beginning. And the reason is because, and this is a little technical, but bear with me, the music begins on an upbeat. What is an upbeat? Well, depending on where the notes fall within a bar, there are upbeats and downbeats. There are stressed beats and unstressed beats. Now, this is a movement in 2-2. That's two beats to a measure. A half note is what gets the beat. And so when you play the first note of a measure and the second note of a measure, you're usually going to get a stress if you're on the offbeat. So you're doing 1, 2, 1, 2. Now let's break up the 1, 2. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. The and is not going to be stressed. It's going to sound weaker. Well, this movement begins on an and. The idea is a 7-note thing. Dun, 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 like that. That's the 7 notes. But that first dun is an and. It's the 2 and. 1 and 2. Dun, 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 like that. If you play it in context, if you know that it's in 2/4, if you know that it's going 1, 2, 1, 2, bum, 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 bottom. Did you hear the difference? Dum, bum, 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 bum is one, and the other is bum, 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 bottom. it sounds completely different in terms of its accent. And Haydn knows this. So when you first hear that motive, that 7-note motive, every note is equally accented in the score. It's got an accent for every single note. You have no idea that you're in 2-2. You have no idea that that first note is an unstressed offbeat or upbeat, whichever you want to call it. It's the same thing. However, it gets repeated again and again and again. And as it's repeated, you always hear the downbeat. So it's dun 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 bum 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 bum, and then dum bum 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 dum. You see, you hear the downbeat accent always. And so when you get to the repeat, this is the thing. Well, let me just play it for you. I created a little example of the initial opening of that 7-note motive, and then the way you hear it after I inserted a second pause on the recapitulation. And listen to what your ear does. It doesn't matter what order you play them in, but one of them will sound like it is stressed all the way throughout and there is no downbeat, and one of them will always sound like there is a downbeat. So one is going to go dun 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 dun, and the other one's going to go dum bum 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 ba-dum. Here, listen to it. These are two separate statements of exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, but it's like an optical illusion or a fool the eye painting. The accent will come out differently. Here. See what I mean? So when Haydn goes back for the repeat, it doesn't sound the same. It sounds like there's a real downbeat on the first beat. You know that the first note is an upbeat, which means, in a sense, that the music has been going before it even starts. That's what gives it some of that incredible excitement. You know, the way that this thing sounds in context. It's mind-boggling. I've been listening to this symphony, I have to say, for decades and decades and decades. And I've studied the score and I've looked at the thing, and I've tried to understand the psychological illusion that Haydn is able to create simply by accenting the theme the first time and then playing it again, but after you've already heard all of these measures of straight 2-2. So you know where the beats are. They continue in your head. So when he goes back and repeats it, it sounds totally different in the way it's accented. It's really, really interesting. And some performances actually, try to eliminate the difference between the two statements of the theme. They deliberately accent the downbeat so that you know right away that you're in 2-2. But I don't think that's right. I think Haydn was subtle enough and brilliant enough to want to exploit this tiny, tiny difference. And by the way, the only way you're going to hear that difference is if the repeat is a perfectly regular repeat, if he doesn't do what he did in the first movement and, surprise you with whether you're going back or not, because what you're going back to isn't going to sound the same. Oh, it's so amazing. Anyway, I want to play you the movement. I'm going to play the whole movement with the repeat in the first half. It's only 3 and a bit minutes long. It is aside from that, amazing little subtle touch, which just fascinates me, which is why I've just harped on it so much. It's one of the most ferocious pieces of music ever written up until that point. It is an essay in musical violence. It really is. And it ends the symphony in a state of absolute rage. Terrific. Here it is. Quite the piece, isn't it? It's just a remarkable thing. And of course, there are all kinds of performances of it and period instrument groups who try to play it as fast as humanly possible. This is not a piece of music in which speed is at a premium. It's going to sound fast no matter what you do, as long as you're not, deliberately slow. But what you really need to know is that it's going to be, you have to hit the accents. It's all about the accents. It's all about phrasing and accent. And it is an extraordinary piece for that reason. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me for this Haydn Symphony Crusade. And next, 45 is the Farewell Symphony. Oh my God, the excitement is just impossible to contain. I just love it. Thanks again. Take care.